All right. Welcome. Today we are going to be talking about the IECC DGC residential sections. Just a few updates. Please make sure your camera is on. Please mute unless you're speaking. We will have a timer for those of you in the general public that want to speak. That will be a 2-minute timer and a 1-minute timer. We'll have a break about halfway through for about 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how we're doing. We will follow Robert's Rules of Order. So for those of you in the general public that are not familiar with those, the proposal will be introduced by myself, the moderator. Then the proponent will speak and give us a brief overview of that proposal. From there, we will ask anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support to raise their hand. If they want to speak in support, you'll have 2 minutes to do so. Then we will move to anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition. You can raise your hand and you would have 2 minutes to do so as well. From there, we will go back to the committee. The committee will then answer or ask questions at that time. From there, we will go back to the general public if anybody spoke up for any rebuttals in support, rebuttals in opposition. Each person will get 1 minute on there. From there, we go back to the committee for any modifications or motions from there. So that is the general outline of how we do things. However, today we are going to do things a little bit differently. As you all saw in the last meeting that we had on the commercial side of things, we are going to introduce a few key proposals. So the first 3 items on the screen today, we will not be voting on today, but you will be introduced to those and be able to ask questions on those. So when it comes time to have discussion and make a motion on those, you guys are fully prepared for that. A couple other housekeeping items. Today, our note keeper will be Charlie, and our subject matter expert will be Robbie. So just keep that in mind. If you aren't familiar with those faces or names, that's who we have. So I think I have to promote Sean over. And I think that should be it. So with that being said, Sean, I'll give you a minute. So I know it always takes a minute to transfer over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Sean is going to talk about proposal 67.
So if you wouldn't mind actually opening that proposal, that might be the best way to do it. All right. So we are having a similar discussion that what we had before. 3 of the big proposals for residential. These are the 3 that we talked about before for commercial. And so hopefully our discussion could be a little bit shorter this time around. And I wanted to start out as we talk about this by talking about the greenhouse gas emission impact. So this is the minimum renewable energy requirement. This is based on goals that are set and modified through the Denver implementation plan for net zero energy. And it sets a minimum level of on-site renewable energy with an option to do it through off-site instead. The greenhouse gas emissions savings from this would be just over 20%, almost 21% at the level that it's set now. You can see we have the same definitions for off-site renewable that you saw on the commercial side. So we can go ahead and scroll down. And the structure is very similar to what you saw for commercial minimum renewable energy. The big difference is that since we're really only talking about single family residences on the residential side, we don't need a table, we just need a single target. And so that single target is up in the text instead. And then everything else looks basically the same. It has the same sort of how it has to be able to interact with R405 and R406. And to that end, since we're going to be talking about proposal 31 later, there's an important way that these 2 proposals interact with each other. And in order to keep R406 more simple, this says that whatever you use to comply with this section of the code any renewable energy you use for this section of the code, you just don't include that in your calculations in R405 and R406. That means that this renewable energy requirement won't do any weird skewing with the percentage improvements, impacting the baseline or the proposed case. It's just a much more simple way to approach it by just kind of isolating the two from each other. So given that we've already kind of discussed this basic concept, I think we can just see if there are any questions for this one specifically.
Okay, so committee, hold tight. We will go to the general public first to see if anybody from the general public has any questions on this proposal. So again, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're not speaking in opposition or in support. We're just asking questions. So anybody from the general public that has a question, please raise your hand. Nathan, I see your hand is up. You should be allowed to talk.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was any documentation in the proposal that kind of represented the cost of construction or cost of design increases that are proposed with this amendment.
So we do, of course, expect this to have an increase for the cost of construction. Courtney, is Johnny on? He's usually has.
Johnny's not available for the meeting today. I do have some information about just the Renewable Connect availability, but I was hoping that most of his questions might have been addressed last week.
All right. So we don't have specific part of that is this is a market that is where the costs of PV kind of go up and down quite a bit. So it's a bit of a moving target. But we are talking about 20% of annual usage. That's the target range. So that will vary based on the size of the home and kind of the amenities that are built into it that impact its annual usage.
Okay, Nathan, does that answer your question? Your hand's still up, so if it does, go ahead and lower your hand. I'll ask a third. Okay, it's down. Third and final time, anybody from the community that has a question, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will go now over to the panelists. So committee members, anybody that has questions on this, again, this is just question time. Please raise your hand. Paul, go ahead.
So everybody, I was just curious with the amount of energy produced per square foot, scenarios, was there any consideration to add in like an example of, to meet this requirement with a 400-watt panel, this will require 2 panels, something like that. I just put that in there because the builders I work with and even how my mind works, if I'm glancing at the code to see what that requirement would be, it'd be helpful to have some context to a given sizing of panel. So I throw that out as a suggestion, maybe more than a question. So.
Okay. Next up, we have Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just have a quick question and maybe sort of a philosophical question about how this applies to buildings with multiple meters. Whether it's a duplex or townhomes or one of the other building types that falls under the residential section of the IECC, if there are requirements for each home to have the renewable energy, so to say, or if it can be on a house meter or if it doesn't matter.
I think I'd welcome what the code enforcement has to say about that, but typically the types of homes that are subject to the residential code under Denver, those are technically separate buildings. They're even though they're smashed up against each other, you are talking about a building with its own meter, a building with its own structure. You're not talking about a unit on top of another unit that doesn't, that gets you into a different code category. So you would have, each building would have its own roof area. And each building site would have its own legal site limits. So if you had PV basically on the adjoining attached single family, that would technically be off-site. It wouldn't be on-site anymore. So you wouldn't be able to use that to meet this requirement because it leverages the definition of on-site renewable system that's already in the code.
So let me see if I'm understanding that right. So like say I've got, some townhomes, a row of townhomes, right? So each
Mhm.
townhome does technically have its own roof, I suppose. Unless it's like a rooftop deck where there is actually no roof space or something, I guess. But so I would have to have the solar be above each unit rather than, maybe, I don't know, on a clubhouse or something like that.
Right. It would need to be on the actual legal site that the building is built on. And I don't know, I've never seen a townhome with a legal townhome that has like a community center, but I suppose it's fully possible, but then that would technically be off-site because it would be on another legal property.
And I'm thinking about kind of now and then we see these live work units, right? That could technically fall under, and there's like a little retail attached and, things get kind of funky with the metering and whatnot and HOAs and things like that. I'm just wondering if there needs to be some language to that because I could see that question coming up.
I think the language as it is now would be fairly restrictive in situations like that. It really would be, you have to install your renewables on your site. So as long as it's on your site, that's what matters. If there's a desire to have more flexibility for other situations where there might be adjoining legally associated sites that might host PVs, I think that would require additional language to make that possible.
Okay, thanks.
Next up is Laura.
Yeah, I think we talked about this with the last proposal for the commercial section as well, just the concern around meeting the 100% goal of renewable energy when the Excel target is just to lower their greenhouse gas emissions. Let me read it exactly. Targets to provide 80% of electricity supply from the grid for non-carbon sources. So just making sure that we're accounting for that 20% that could be carbon sources from the Excel side, and just making sure we have that all added up to ensure we get to that goal of 100%. So that's one concern. And then I didn't know, or it's not clear to me on the proposal if this is just applying to new, and if we defining new somewhere else for like new residential buildings or remodeled or new project.
I might, this is Robbie, I might be able to
Sure.
answer that because it's not in the chapter 5. It's not being placed in chapter 5. It wouldn't be applicable to the existing home.
Okay. And then can you guys further explain the statement at the bottom? A Denver Green Code accompanying this proposal is not treat that statement.
Can you bring that up on the screen?
It's way down at the bottom.
I can jump in and explain that a little bit.
Okay.
I think the portion you're looking at is saying that there's no accompanying Denver Green Code proposal. And in a lot of these that we'll start to see coming up, there is an IECC version, and then there's a Denver Green Code version of that proposal, and we'll hear those at the same time, so we can kind of put the restrictions for the IECC and then adapt the Denver Green Code accordingly. So we're just saying this one does not have one. A good question. Thanks.
Okay. Sounds good. And then, yeah, an example of how this applies would be nice. Square footage, or if there's any cost or project cost size, like budget size, just to consider having an individual homeowner paying for a offsite renewable energy source, while electricity prices could, continue to climb. So perhaps a project with a larger budget could do this, but perhaps a project with a smaller budget, even if it had the same square footage, might not be able to reasonably afford that option.
So then you're thinking about, when you say larger project, you don't actually mean larger square footage, you mean higher end. Because the requirement is based on square footage. So it would kind of scale up and down with home size, but would not scale up and down with home fanciness.
Right. That's correct. Or if you guys had put considerations around that.
Right now, it's purely it purely focuses on energy. And so that's really the criteria that drives the requirement. But it doesn't have, and that's why the size, why it scales with size. That gives us a good way to do the prescriptive, scale it prescriptively. But there isn't a threshold in there right now for, say, a home that's under a certain value might be exempt or have a different requirement, since it is focused on energy.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Great. Anybody else from the committee have questions? Bill, I saw your hand go up, but it went down, so maybe your question was already answered.
I was debating on the question. I see that the financial renewable energy power purchase is an option in here, but it's listed under offsite. Is there, if the solar system is on site, on the residence and wired in with that electrical panel, is there, I'm assuming it can then be installed through any number of means, whether it's direct ownership, power purchase agreement, lease, or other financing structures that are available in the market?
So right now, the proposal is blind to ownership of what it looks like on site. And that is a bit of a compromise, because that can get very complicated and very difficult to deal with in the code.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion from the committee? This is your chance to really dive into it. I know we already had a glimpse of this last time, but we'll do one last final call. Anybody from the committee have any other comments, questions, or concerns about this? Great. So come next in the residential hearing, you guys will be ready to vote on this. All right, so that we'll close this one out, and we will bring up item number 47 now. Don, you want to go ahead and start?
All right.
Giving us a summary.
So this is also, it's similar in many ways to what we saw before with C406. However, because this is on the residential side, there are a few very key differences. Right now, section R408 is a package-based approach. So you pick one out of a number of packages, and that's your additional efficiency option. This is what C406 used to look like. C406, as we discussed last time, has gone to a credit-based approach in 2021. However, in 2021, R408 is still a package-based approach. What this does is it replaces the package-based approach with a credit-based approach. And it does this for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to insert a lot more options. It allows us to have much greater flexibility because now you're able to recognize that different options deliver different levels of energy efficiency. And it's not just a matter of, you can actually do multiple options to get to the goal. It leads to greater consistency in the outcomes, because now with a credit-based approach, all the projects will be shooting for the same level of efficiency, as opposed to just, you might choose one package that kind of exceeds that 3% target that was built into the into the package approach, but then some of them actually deliver more like 6 or 7%. This was the savings for this is all based on modeling that was done based on the national prototypes for residential buildings, for single family homes, run in Denver's climate zone, run with Denver's weather files. It is the savings were, we used 2 prototypes for this. One was a conditioned basement and one was a crawl space. Those 2 were averaged together. We heard from the city that construction in Denver is about 50-50 split between those 2 typologies. And so we used those 2 national prototypes, and then we modeled, all of these options in to see what the impact of them are. In one important difference between this and C406 is that a credit in C406 is equivalent to a 0.25% improvement, while a credit here is equivalent to a % improvement. It just, with the results that we were getting, it made more sense to do it that way and made it a little bit easier to use. And there are 26 credit options, so we have a lot of options, because the other thing that doing this allows us to do is really ratchet up what the performance requirement is in the prescriptive path. Right now in the prescriptive path, outside of moving to a credit approach, the only way to really ramp up the stringency of the code is to insert more mandatory requirements. But that, of course, means that the code is going to be less flexible. There are less ways that you can get to that level of performance. And there's limits to the number of packages that you can require in the package approach. So this credit approach allows the prescriptive path in the code to still be viable with the performance levels that Denver is targeting. And you will notice that there are 2 targets in this. This is also similar to what we saw in C406. A mixed fuel building would be going for 18 credits, which brings that mixed fuel building up to the performance level that the code is looking for, that the implementation plan has for the code this cycle. And then the 3 credits, again, recognizes the greenhouse gas advantage of moving to an all-electric home. And 3 credits is equal to basically what the package approach delivers under 2021. So this ensures that even an all-electric building is just as efficient as an all-electric building built under 2021. If you scroll down, yes, so right here, this is also very similar to what we saw in R406. I mean, in C406, we tried to make this as much like C406 as possible in its structure, because while there may not be a big overlap between the markets that use these 2 parts of the code, there is some, and that consistency should help with both understandability, usability, and enforceability. And the last thing to note about this is that the credit values, they are based on percentages. Since this is a little bit of a broad approach to this, and capturing interactive effects between measures is a little bit of a challenge, because you don't know what combination of measures people are going to use. So in order to address the reality that there would be interactive effects, the calculated savings for each measure is not actually calculated from 2021. It's calculated from 2020 to 2021 with more efficient space conditioning and more efficient water heating, the 2 packages that are in 2021 that we figured would be the most common. So that just effectively derates the credit value for each measure, so that we account for that interactive effects as well as we can with an approach like this. And I think that covers the broad sense. I did want to mention that the total savings, that the greenhouse gas savings that we would expect from this is about 14%. And that has actually a couple of really important assumptions that interplay with our R406 proposal. And that's assuming that under the next edition of the code, that half of the projects would go through the prescriptive path and half of them would go through the modeling path. I mean, really, when we talk about this and we talk about, well, R406 might be, modeling path might not be the right way to characterize that, but really the total savings for efficiency is these two proposals added together, because each one of them represents a portion of the building stock that we expect to go through that compliance path.
All right, thanks, Sean, for that rundown of this proposal. Committee, hang tight. I'm going to go to the general public. First, general public, is there anybody that wants to ask a question or speak on this? I have question, comments, or concerns. Please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that has questions, comments, or concerns, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that has questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, I'll go to the committee now. Committee, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand.
I did forget to mention one thing. If you saw this proposal earlier, we did have a definition of all electric building, but considering this committee has already had a discussion about that, we tried to capture that discussion in these definitions so that they can be leveraged. And again, you know, the intention is you define the building, and then if you need exceptions, you define the exceptions in the body of the text.
Here, I'll ask a second time. Anybody have any questions? And the third time, anybody from the committee have any questions? Elizabeth, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you were still on the public. Didn't realize you'd moved to committee. Almost wasn't fast enough. I have a handful of questions, just as how an electric building falls in versus a gas building or mixed fuel building. And some of these I'm still wrapping my mind around, honestly. So maybe if you just look at a couple of things to do with like high efficiency electric water heating in unconditioned space, which is R408.10.3. I'm not sure I understand that. Is that saying that the water heating equipment is not permitted to be in conditioned space?
It's saying that the savings for high efficient water heating, which we're talking about a heat pump water heater, is different if it's in conditioned space versus unconditioned space. The efficiency of the system goes down, but you're not scavenging heat from the conditioned space, so the usage goes up. So there's some interactive effects that occur. So we modeled them separately, and one assumes that if a heat pump water heater in an unconditioned space would either be in an unconditioned part of the basement, most likely in a single family home, or in the garage. Neither one of these, as we understand, are very common in Denver right now, but we wanted to allow for that possibility. So really, this is just depending on where you put your heat pump water heater, you would have a different number of credits available for you.
And so my understanding that if you don't put it in conditioned space, you're allowed to have the efficiency be worse?
No, the efficiency of the equipment requirement is the same, but the amount of savings that the equipment delivers is different based on whether it's in conditioned versus unconditioned space. So you actually, even though a heat pump water heater is scavenging heat when it's in conditioned space, the impact on the efficiency of how it runs is enough that you actually have more savings overall than if you would put it in an unconditioned space in a climate like Denver.
So under 408.10, I mean, there's 3-4 different things here about high efficiency electric water heating. There's 10.2, 10.3, 10.5, 10.6. Those aren't valued different point wise, are they?
If you look at them, They are.
Oh, I see.
2,
So those
7,
are each
5.
individual.
Mhm.
I see. Okay. For some reason in my head, I was thinking 408.10 was just the same amount of points. I see. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you. That helps a bunch.
And I'll preemptively answer this question since it might come up. Anytime where there is an electrification option, because we do have those, the language like in C406 lets you know that if you're an all electric building, you don't get to use these options because you're already getting the credit for being all electric.
Okay, any other questions, comments, or concerns from the committee? This is your final opportunity to do that before we go vote on it next residential hearing. Okay, seeing no more hands up, we will go to the, oh, I do see a hand. Chuck, go ahead.
So I know there's other proposals about electrification. And so if those pass, would this have to be modified?
If those passed, then those options would just need to be taken out. Yeah, this whole thing would need to be modified. And then I think the committee would have to think about how those interact with all electric, because those two proposals from SWEEP are specifically about space heating and water heating, but they don't actually require all electric buildings. Well, in here we have provision for all electric buildings. And so, you know, the difference then between a mostly electric versus all electric building would also need to be dealt with. You know, do you still want an all electric building to only get need to get 3 credits, or do they need to now get more because they might have gas cooking, they might have gas clothes drying? I don't think that's very common in Denver. It's more of an East Coast thing.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll do one more final call. Does everybody understand this? Is there any final questions? Everybody comfortable with this in terms of how it's written, in terms of how you can read it? Final call. Okay, seeing no more, we'll go to the next item, item number 31. Sean, I believe that's you again.
Yep. So we'd like to start by highlighting that this is, you saw this before, but this is, might as well just consider this a new proposal at this point. It's been reworked based on the discussion that was had before. And so try to think of this as a new proposal. This proposal does 2 basic things. One is that it cleans up our 406 just to make it work better. And Robbie's going to talk to you about how it does that. And if you could scroll down to where it actually talks about the energy rating index. The other thing that it does is it calibrates the ERI target. Scroll up just a little bit. Calibrates the ERI target to Denver's goals.
It appears that you're not showing the revision.
Oh yeah, this is the old version of it.
It's on in the link. It's correctly linked on the Denver website.
It is. Yeah, zoom in just a little bit there. So the ERI target of 50 is set in the implementation plan. One of the things that you will notice here is that there's no discussion of a target with or without on-site renewables, because the goal for on-site renewables is set in the other proposal. So we're able to consider those separately. So for this one, all that is needed is what you might consider the efficiency goal from the implementation plan, which is the ERI of 50. And because of that, we can get rid of the table, just have the 50 right there in the text. And it still does allow for a limited amount of additional renewables to be included in the ERI calculation. This is something that was already in 2021, that you could use up to 5% within your ERI calculation. We've maintained that just to maintain some extra flexibility, but really want to emphasize that because of how the other proposal is structured, any on-site renewable that you use to meet the minimum renewables requirement wouldn't be able to be used here toward the ERI, and it would be capped at 5%. This basically it protects the building from trading off too much of its efficiency with renewables. So it ensures basically a backstop for the efficiency of the building. It's very straightforward to do it this way. Like I said, the target comes straight out of the plan. The greenhouse gas impact for this is very similar to what we would see for R408. It's right there in 13–14%. And again, we're assuming that because of what's happening with the code, that more projects would be going through this path. But the performance of the two are calibrated to each other. So, the ultimate performance level is about the same. And I'll let Robbie walk through some of the enhancements that have been made to the section itself to make the ERI path work better for Denver.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all for your comments to make this proposal much better and pointed. The real benefit of this proposal is that it now links itself directly to the ResNet HERS Energy Rating Index score, therefore resolving inconsistencies between the IECC Energy Rating Index score as published in the exact language of the IECC and the ResNet index score that is widely used in the Denver area here. That benefit means that builders that are currently using the energy rating index for quantification of performance, for marketing, for other things, really can use this pathway now, and there isn't a problem now. And so we anticipate that this pathway will be utilized much more than it has in any other code adoption cycle that this pathway has been available for. So I'm sorry, going back up to the top, Kevin, yeah, you'll see in the first charging language of the scope that there's a specific reference to that ResNet HERS Energy Rating Index there. The table here in the 2021 IECC, the idea of prescriptive requirements and mandatory requirements was removed there. So things that are talked about in the prescriptive compliance pathway section that describe how you install something, those things are now just labeled requirements. And to ensure that those requirements are actually required in these performance-based compliance sections, they needed to be put into this table. So that, I mean, the easiest one to think about is this attic eave baffles of the R402.2.3 section. Just because that is described how you install attic eave baffles in that prescriptive compliance section, it doesn't mean that if you have a ventilated attic and you're using a performance path that you could trade off the installation of attic eave baffles. So there are some other things that have been that were left out of this table, and those are in red and underlined here, that are being added into this table to ensure parity between the different compliance pathways. All of these things only deal with how you install something. They don't deal with R values or U values that could potentially be traded off for. And to be clear that this same proposal for that table has been introduced in the 2024 IECC code development process and has been accepted at that level as well. So you're going to see it, you're going to be ahead of the game a little bit here in Denver. Moving down there, we also in section R406.4.3, we added some unusual language that works well at a local adoption process, but doesn't work so well on a national level adoption process. And that is that's that language that's underlined there that says the most recent publication of the ANSI 301 standard. The reason that that's been added is because the ANSI standard for how you develop an energy rating index score is a continual maintenance standard. So as that standard, in order to have good alignment between the HERS energy rating index that builders are currently using and to use it in the code from a code perspective for compliance, you want to make sure that there's alignment there so that when or if the standard is updated, ResNet gives a six month or year-long transition period, and that same transition period will be utilized for compliance with the code. So there will always be consistency in that energy rating index that is used. As Sean said, the score and the table has been changed so that we're just referencing the energy rating index of 50 now in R406.4. And then the rest of the document is based off of the current 2021 IECC, just the numbering, some numbering has changed there. But what's new in the 2021 IECC in this pathway is that you have to submit a proposed energy rating index compliance document for the permit submittal. And then you have to submit a confirmed energy rating index application as part of the documentation to get your certificate of occupancy. So this language just really mirrors the language that was in the building performance pathway, the simulated performance pathway in the past there. So I think that explains the changes. And if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Okay, thanks, Robbie and Sean. I will turn it over to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak with a question, comment, or concern, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that has a question, comment, or concern, please raise your hand. And finally, anybody from the general public that has a question, comment, or concern. I see one. Nathan, you'll have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
How's it going? Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record, I'm sure, to some of you, but obviously house costs are always pretty sensitive to the builders in the group and consumers as they're trying to buy houses. And I was looking through, and I think, Robbie, you checked the box on here that says no impact or no increase to construction costs. I was going to see if maybe you could talk to that a little bit on how you can get a 10% increase in energy efficiency without an increase in house costs.
So that's based off of the current iteration of the R406 energy rating index pathway in the IECC as written. So it's using the code-based ERI index score. and it's much more restrictive than this approach is. So that's where that no impact is coming. So the score of reaching 50 in, on a regional level, the average index score is somewhere in that 50 to 55 range in the Colorado Front Range, according to ResNet data. And so it shouldn't impact. There might be a slight impact, but I put down no impact in the construction. Really what we're trying to do is get this pathway utilized more in the construction process for demonstrating compliance. You're going to have to meet the 2021 IECC requirements regardless.
Okay, Nathan, any other questions? You have a few moments left of your time. If you had any follow-up questions for that.
So the other paths would go away, correct? And this would be the only path?
Not in this code cycle.
Okay.
That it's a potential in the future, but it hasn't been decided.
Okay.
If that would be proposed.
All right, thanks, Robbie.
All right. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak? Questions, comments, concerns? Okay, seeing no more, I will turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is now your time to have any questions, comments, or concerns. Eric, you're up first.
Thank you, Kevin. Robbie, so specifically with respect to R406.3, which is the Energy Rater Index, and the reference standard that you were speaking to, the IECC ANSI ResNet 301, you were making some comments about what I believe was the necessary coordination between the ResNet and the standard, and the language that's been proposed as a revision here that reads the most recent publication of is likely problematic from a legal perspective in terms of the city and county adopting theoretically standards that have not yet come into existence. For example, a 2022 or 2023 edition of this standard. We really can't adopt something that doesn't exist because, quite frankly, we don't know what we're adopting. So right now, the IECC references the 2019 edition of the standard. And my question is, what problems or conflicts would be created if we were required to stay on the 2019 edition of the standard until the next code cycle when we updated the IECC language?
Because the standard is under a continual maintenance process, there are subtle things that could change the index score and how energy features are evaluated and analyzed in the software that generates the index score. It would be minor, but raters generally are the ones, energy raters are generally the ones that do that modeling and provide the score. They are, in essence, forced by ResNet to adopt the new software release at a certain time, within a certain time frame. And so there is a potential that houses would be analyzed and scores would be given that would be using a version of the standard that wasn't exactly codified, I guess, that in that way. Usually that the update doesn't change things dramatically, but sometimes it could. So the workaround there would be to, I think, would be to instead of saying the ANSI 2019 version, they're coming out with the new version this year, is to adopt that version of the standard. And then we would have to ensure that raters have access to that modeling version unchanged through the softwares, which is a possibility of doing.
All right, I thank you for answering that. I follow what you're saying, and it may be necessary then to revise the reference year of the standard to 2022.
Yeah.
Within our standards, reference standard section.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can make that change before the next hearing.
And when ResNet did release 2019, so they released it in October, but they didn't force the raters to start using it until April of 2021. So there was an 18-month lag period. So that also helps with just kind of coordinating. But there may be a situation where Denver might have to update its reference just from practical standpoints.
Yeah. I'll ask Charlie Trujillo to maybe make a note of that in our notes so that we can come back and track that. Thank you.
Great. Next up is Bill.
Sorry, I was hoping I could get a little help understanding section 406.6.3, where we're addressing renewable energy credit documentation for the renewable energy on-site renewable energy system. This looks like what we're talking about here, and what the intent of that is. I know there's only about 5% of the solar that can be used for this, which might make this a moot point because I don't know that it's going to make a meaningful impact at this level on the HERS score for 5% of the solar to be able to be included. But I was curious about the thought behind the reasoning behind this section.
Sean, feel free to jump in, but my understanding is that the renewable energy credit, there's a financial piece to that, and that they just want to ensure that that credit goes to the right individual. And so there's a requirement of this actual software tool to be able to calculate that and report it.
Maybe I'm thinking of this wrong, and correct me if I am, but most of the power purchase agreement, lease agreements that are very common in installing residential solar and make it very economical and provide the opportunity for more significantly sized systems because of that economic benefit. The buyer has to acknowledge that they don't own the RECs and that the RECs stay with the owner of the system, which could be a bank or a solar company or something along those lines. So my concern was that this pushes towards purchase only, if I'm understanding this correctly, which could be counterintuitive to the desire, I think, of what we're looking for, and push people to have to purchase systems. And because they're purchasing systems outright and not using some of these more cost-effective financing methods, would cause those systems to be significantly smaller and just enough to meet the code, rather than expanding those systems to offset more of the site usage of power. That's making sense.
So for R406, we talked for the minimum renewable section how that section was blind to ownership.
Yes,
This section is
which I
not.
think is good. Right.
And this
And
section
like I said, I don't
is
think it
not-
matters. So I think 5% is not going to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Robbie, it's not going to do much of anything to the HERS score.
They can make
at a
some
level.
important design decisions could be made, I think, based on 5%. I think the important thing to understand here is that this language isn't being proposed for Denver. This is 2021 language. So this is language that is coming from the model code. And it's because the model code recognizes that when you are looking at the potential of trading off renewable energy for efficiency, which is what this allows you to do, you are allowed to trade renewable energy for efficiency, that the renewable energy actually have an environmental benefit. So if you sell off the RECs, if the RECs are the environmental benefit of a renewable energy system. So by allowing a purchase power agreement type setup, any financial structure where the RECs are sold off of the system that is on your site, then that PV system has no environmental benefit to the site. And so since someone else is already claiming the environmental benefit, the home shouldn't be able to claim the environmental benefit to offset efficiency that they would have been required to do under code. So if you allow systems that aren't outright purchased under R406, you're basically just derating R406 by the percentage of the renewable energy system. Those homes have 5% less environmental benefit than other homes do. So that's why the R406 in the national codes is not blind to ownership structure, because when you're talking about trading renewables for energy efficiency, that becomes a really important way to maintain the environmental benefit of the code.
Thank you.
All right, committee, any other discussion on this one? Questions, comments, concerns? Brian, I saw your hand go up, but oh, there it is. You're up again. Go ahead.
Yeah, just back to what Eric was talking about. A way to clean that up might be you can permit the current addition to be used, but not require it. So you pick an addition to adopt and then permit a more current addition to be used. Because I understand the issue with not having software that can go back to an older code to meet the requirements. So that might be a way to clean that up, is to permit it.
Okay. Thanks for that insight.
Great. Thank you.
Jamie,
We'll follow up on that.
Jamie, your hand's up next.
How do you end up, this is to Sean, I guess, how do you prevent the owner from later on signing up for Excel Solar Rewards program? At least it's that.
So it's a little bit self-policing. Most of those financial arrangements where you sell off the RECs, you have to agree to give them up before you get your PV panels. So if someone finds a creative way to sell off their RECs after they've got their certificate of occupancy, there's really nothing that the code can do about that. However, the market realities of trying to sell the RECs of your own PV panel on your home as a private seller are pretty cumbersome. In fact, there might be a way to do it, but I'm not aware of a way to do it. So I think that if that is a concern, it's a fairly fringe concern that the code probably doesn't need to try to bend over backwards to address.
I have no idea of the inner workings if I signed up for Solar Rewards with Excel. I mean, they make it sound easy, but I've never gone through the process. So I have no idea for new versus existing what it would be like.
Yeah, the whole REC system really depends on aggregation to get a big number, which is why it's that company that does the install on your home, they're aggregating all their customers together so that they have a tranche of RECs that they can sell to someone on the market that's meaningful. Someone selling just a piddly little bit of RECs, they would have to sell it to an aggregator in the financial overhead of that would be substantial.
Okay, committee, last call. This is now your time to speak up, ask questions, because next time you see this, you'll be voting on it. So anybody else have any questions, comments, or concerns? Mark, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank the proponents for taking this back and taking a look at it, making some significant changes to it. I think from the solar industry, we definitely support the single ERI backstop. I don't think, our mission is to make a planet run by the sun. And while I'm doing that, I also don't want to make a planet that's cooled by inefficient homes. So I think we still want to stick in that realm. So, and again, thanks for the proponents.
Great. Okay, seeing no more hands up, we will close this one out. And
So
we're doing
Kevin,
good on
Courtney,
time. Oh,
Courtney asked if I could put kind of the tracking chart up for everyone to look at to see the cumulative impact of these three proposals that we have talked about. And so if you would let me share, then I can show everyone. All right. So you should be able to see it now. I wanted to point out, we have continued to make a little bit of a modification to the methodology. We went back to the partial electrification proposals and realized that the way that it is, the way that it's phrased, the benefit is not just electrification, it's also efficiency. So our max potential is now below the line. Congratulations, everyone. You have a meetable goal now. And if we look at the impact of just the proposals that we've talked about so far, then we get just above the line. So they wouldn't quite get Denver all the way to its goal, but would get Denver close to its goal for this code cycle. So I just wanted to show you what that looks like graphically.
And Sean, just to clarify, you said the three proposals we just talked about today would get us to that current
Yes.
status? Okay, so that does
Yes.
not include the electrification suite proposals.
Right, so if I include the other big ones, so the two partial electrification proposals, you can see that it shows us below the line. However, I want to give a little bit of a caution because there's a bit of an overlap. Since the partial electrification would result in efficiency, basically the efficiency proposals R408 and R406, the savings from those would need to be adjusted just so that we're not double counting those efficiency gains. And so that might move that dot up. But we can see that we do start to get to that goal with all of them, which is not something that we thought was going to happen before. So that's all I wanted to show there. And I think we can move on to the next thing.
okay. So next item of business will be E45. And that is Michaela. Michaela, I am bringing you over to a panelist. So if you want to turn on your video and give us a rundown of your proposal, that would be great.
So when you move people from panelists or from audience to panelists, they lose all connectivity and can't hear what you said. So if you're ready for me to present, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So this, sorry, move some things around. This proposal is to address change of occupancy in the IECC for both residential structures in both the IECC, IRC, and the residential provisions and commercial provisions of the IECC. So in Denver, we promote the reuse of structures, and with the current provisions of the IECC, we have found that applicants are run into a lot of roadblocks with reusing structures and adaptive reuse. That happens quite often when you are moving from a commercial structure to a residential structure. So examples that happen quite often are from like a church to a new single family dwelling. In our previous amendments to the commercial provisions of the IECC for change of occupancy, we had incorporated a table, and if you don't mind scrolling down to the table, that outlined the energy demand categories for different IDC occupancies. And this allowed that if you, let's say if you had a B occupancy structure within the IDC and you were changing the occupancy to another, like to an R occupancy, that we would consider it the same energy demand category. It wouldn't necessarily require you to comply with the entire IECC. So in some instances, having to bring everything up in terms of the thermal envelope, duct testing, et cetera. However, this was not implemented as part of the residential provisions at that time. I don't think it was proposed at that time. And since we found that it would be really beneficial. So what we have proposed is to add in the IRC uses are equivalent to our occupancy in the commercial provisions. So that allows applicants to go from the IDC to IRC or vice versa. And then we are also adding this to the residential provisions to outline that, you know, if you are moving from a single family dwelling to a two-family dwelling, you will not have to fully comply with the IECC for just change of occupancy provisions. You will still have to comply with the IECC for any repairs, alterations, or additions. And our sections of the code do address that in terms of going from unconditioned space to conditioned space. That's it.
Okay, that's the summary that you wanted to give, so that's great. What we'll do now is we're going to keep you on as a panelist so that you can answer questions instead of, and not lose connectivity there. But we will go to the general public first. So anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from Sean? I guess technically you are the general public. So Sean, you will have 2 minutes to speak in support. Go ahead.
As someone with a historic preservation background, speaking for myself in this case, I think this kind of approach to change of occupancy is really important to the reuse of buildings. This approach is actually modeled on our approach to hazard that's already in the code, where you go to higher or lower hazard categories, and then the requirements that are attached when you do that. And I think it's a really logical and really understandable approach that allows you to be more flexible for these kinds of change of occupancies without losing the genuine opportunities, important opportunities for efficiency. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing no more, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Third and final call for the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask questions of the proponent. Anybody from the committee that has a question, please raise your hand. Anybody? Mark, your hand's up.
Yeah, I just have one simple one. When would the opportunity present itself for a change in occupancy for new construction? Or am I misreading the first sentence?
All right. Can you clarify which first sentence you're referring to?
Under R505.1 general, spaces undergoing a change in occupancy or use to a higher energy demand category, a higher number, as shown in table R405, R505.1 shall comply with the requirements of this chapter for new construction. So my question is, when would a building be under new construction but have a change of occupancy?
Yeah, so I read that sentence differently. So what that sentence is trying to say is existing building, it's changing the use of the structure. So a great example of that, let's just do a church to single family dwelling. And what this section is saying is, in those instances, if it went to a higher use demand category, that entire structure has to comply with this code for new construction.
God, that makes sense to me. So maybe I'm proposing that for new construction is substituted for additions, alterations, and repairs. Right, because that's an alteration to an existing building.
The one concern I'd have there is, and this is why the change of occupancy exists, right? In our code, is sometimes the use changes without necessarily any intended additions, alterations, or repairs. Otherwise, there would be no need for necessarily this section.
Well, then would there also be no new construction? I want to make sure you get what you want.
Yeah, so this section is not referring to construction, like actual new construction occurring. It's saying that you have to follow the provisions for new construction, as if it was new construction.
Maybe that section should be removed, and then it should just end with shall comply with the requirements of this chapter, period.
Okay, next question from the committee comes from Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on that. That's actually existing language in the IECC, and I would support it as you have it written. What it's saying, so this is this section about it falls under the alterations section, section 5. So that's not actually the new construction section. So if you have an alteration, what it's saying is that if you have a building that's undergoing a change of use, you don't get to use this section anymore. You got to go use the new construction section. So it is, it aligns with the code as it's written right now.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. Any other questions from the committee? Eric, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Michaela, would you be open to committee amendments that recognize IRC uses that would, from an existing perspective, be something other than energy demand category 2? For example, if we have an attached or detached garage or an accessory structure, that doesn't seem like it would fall in category 2 at this point. Would you be open to a friendly amendment?
Right, I see that perspective, right, of that maybe detached garages or some accessory structures that are really incidental might necessarily fall in the lowest energy demand. I think we have to be extremely careful with how we draft that, and be very clear that it's accessory structures that are do not contain living space. we recently passed on the IRC committee a proposal that clarified some of the uses in IRC structures that address some of those accessory structures with living space. But I absolutely understand that. I also can see how we can get there from a perspective with this, how the amendment is drafted to enforce on those structures because they're likely undergoing other alterations if it's a garage to say a IBC occupancy with higher demand.
Okay, any other questions? Chuck, I saw your hand go up, but it went down. That's fine if you don't have a question, but it went back up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just add to Eric's comment, because it was a discussion we had earlier talking about detached accessory structures or structures that are not conditioned. And Mike actually emailed and pointed out to me earlier that at the beginning of this proposal, the section talks about going from uses from conditioned space or from unconditioned space to conditioned space, which I think resolves our concerns that we had earlier today about referencing all uses permitted by the IRC, because the going from unconditioned to conditioned is covered earlier before you get to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, seeing no more questions, we'll go back to the general public since someone spoke up on that. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, you'll have 1 minute as a rebuttal. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll go back to the committee. Committee, this is now your time to have discussion or to make a motion. So both of those things are out there for you to do. If anybody wants to do any of that, please raise your hand. Mark, go ahead.
I just wanted to go back real quick. I was looking for that language in our 505 in the code, and I didn't see any reference to like new construction in that part of the code. Maybe you can help me find it. Elizabeth, sorry. I don't find that the language matches.
Yeah, it has to do with, I mean, it's just the section 5 has to do with existing buildings, everything with existing buildings, which is just a different set of rules than new construction. So what her language here is saying is that if you trigger the requirement that your structure is going to a higher usage, you can't use the section for existing buildings anymore, and you got to go use the new construction section. There is a bit in section, I want to say it's R503. Oh, code people, help me out. Maybe it is. Sorry, you know what? I'm looking at 2018 IECC. Sorry about that. But I mean, essentially, that's what this is an alteration. If you're altering an existing building in a way that you can't say that the energy use is the same. Like if you're increasing the energy use because you're going to a higher energy demand, you can't use the alteration section anymore, and it pushes you into new construction.
Yeah, I think I'm understanding the intent. I just don't necessarily feel like the language is supporting the path. That could be confusing. I guess that's what I'm just pointing out. If you think you guys think it's clear, then I'll drop it. Yeah,
we have something similar in the commercial section of the code. And in the last code cycle, there was similar clarification added, because like in the current code, it's really vague about, well, you know, if your alteration doesn't increase your energy use, then you can use this section. Well, how do we know that if it doesn't increase the energy use? So in the commercial section, that was amended to define what is an increase of energy use. So hopefully it makes it clearer. So I don't know if we want to add even a couple words that might help to clarify that. Oh, sorry, I just lost my place in this code. There it is. Sorry. maybe it's the, any spaces undergoing a change of use to a higher energy demand category, blah, 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 shall comply with the requirements for new construction instead of the requirements of this chapter.
That's a totally different meaning now. But now I think it's more what you're talking about. But yeah, so shall comply with the requirements for new construction. That's kind of what you've been talking about, right?
I believe that's what we mean. I mean, technically, this is a section in a chapter, but does it make better sense if we just say shall comply with the requirements for new construction? Does that make more sense? It's like, I don't know, it's kind of funky language, right? Because technically it's the chapter, but it's the section, I don't know. Or is it maybe well, let me back up. Sorry, was this Michaela's proposal?
Yes.
I've got too many things open on my screen now. Sorry. Michaela, is that the intent, is that it kicks you over to the new construction code altogether?
It takes you into the provisions of the code of IECC for new construction.
So would it be better to remove those 3 words of this chapter?
I believe a chapter clarifies that you were still speaking to IECC and to the new construction section of the IECC. And then further below, you see that I think there's another sentence I add that has to comply with this chapter also for additions, alterations, and repairs.
So no, I think I'm seeing what you're saying, Mark. If we look at how the code is set up, the existing buildings is described as chapter 5.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're saying the requirements of this chapter, meaning chapter 5, chapter 5 is existing buildings. So is it better to say chapter 4?
Yeah, or chapter 3?
No, I'm sorry, Mark. It took me a minute to catch up with what you meant, but now I see it. So I think, Michaela, I believe the intent is to refer you into chapter 4, right? Yes? No?
So the intent really is, with the existing buildings is still the existing building section, but all the provisions of existing buildings also point to new construction and in the sections for alterations, repairs, and additions. So, I'm comfortable if we just eliminated for new construction or said of this chapter. I think we could administer it and understand what that means. But I guess what others have to say on this call. I think there's
I think I just want to make sure I understand the intent, because I don't think that chapter 5 really does speak to new construction, other than saying it's a different section or a different chapter. But that's the intent, right? So like, let's say I'm taking an unconditioned garage and I want to put a dwelling unit in it. I can't follow section R505. Or chapter R505. I got to go follow chapter R40, whatever, right?
Right. Thank you.
So yeah. So I think we want to just delete those 3 words of this chapter. Because then I would, if I have to do new construction, I can't use chapter 5, period. I got to go do new construction. I got to go follow the rules for new construction. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good discussion there. That is how the intent of the code is set up, both on the commercial side and residential side. Just a little bit of clarification that any existing buildings that are going under addition, alteration, or change of use, it is chapter 5, whether it's residential or commercial, it is chapter 5 of that section. And then within that section, there are times where it says, if you are over X amount of something, then you have to follow the provisions in the regular new construction section. So that is the intent of the code. It sounds like that is the intent of this proposal. So when it comes time to make a motion, there might be somebody that to consider getting rid of these 3 words that are on the screen to help clarify that. So just keep that in mind. And I think that then covers Mark's and Elizabeth's concerns with this one. Next up for discussions or motion is Paul.
Hey, folks, I'll just ask a separate question. Just curious where, how the energy demand categories are created in this. I think it's coming probably from the commercial code, but can anyone explain how those come together? So what they mean?
A question for me or for other members?
Sure.
Yeah,
well,
anyone who's capable.
Go ahead.
Answering.
If you want to answer that, go ahead. But we do have Robbie, who is our subject matter expert, on the line as well. So if you want to defer to him, that's fine too.
Yeah. So these energy demand categories were created to follow the table for hazards that exist in the International Existing Building Code. And that was done in the previous amendment cycle under the commercial through committees, the commercial provisions. So.
Robbie, you're on mute if you want to chime in.
Yeah, sorry. I was wondering if I could ask a follow-up question. So it's just saying that the energy demand is greater, but it's not quantified in any way. What that actually means was there an intent to link it to being more energy demand than the structure was before it was altered, or anything like that?
So we in Denver had interpreted this as categories with the intent that, the initial structure, if you're in the same category of a B occupancy to another B occupancy, we would consider that the same energy demand without having to really look at like the last year of energy demand for the structure.
Thank you.
Next up is Brian.
Back to that R505.1. This is kind of directed towards Michaela, Elizabeth, and Mark. If you reverse the order of those 2 sentences, I think it reads a lot better and it makes it a lot clearer. So basically the first sentence would be any space that is converted to a residential building shall comply with the requirements of this chapter for additions, alterations, and repairs, and then go to the first sentence. I think it makes it a lot clearer. So if that's worth it, it might help that. And then you don't have to rewrite anything, just flip those 2 sentences.
Okay. Brian, something to consider if someone wants to make a motion. Any discussion or motions? Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I liked Brian's suggestion too. I'll make a motion to, let me make sure I say this right, to approve with the intent to modify. Did I do that right?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay.
I like it. I'll second that.
Never remember how you do this. And my proposal to modify would be to swap the sentences as Brian suggested and to remove the words of this chapter before for new construction.
Okay. And Mark, I believe that was you that seconded that motion. Is that correct? Okay, got a thumbs up.
Kevin, all of that should be underlined, because it's all new. Everything
In terms of the proposal.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. We can do that. That was just how the proposal was written, so we'll do that.
Night.
Technically, Michaela, I can't
Yeah.
go to you, so I'm sorry. Any discussion from the committee? Okay, seeing none, there is a motion. Charlie, I'm going to come to you for a roll call here in a minute. There is a motion to approve with the intent to modify, and those changes, those modifications are on the screen there, and there is a second. So, but before we vote, now that we're in the voting section, we want to take a roll call, see if we're missing anybody, and see how many voting members we have. So, Charlie, can you help us out with that?
Yeah, definitely. So as of right now, I have 22 committee members accounted for, but I'll quickly just run down the names. I'm sorry if I missed anybody that's here and is noted in this list, but the names I don't have accounted for are Carol Pafford, Chris Parr, Chris Spelke, John Burns, Curtis Underwood, John Dutch, Linda Morrison, Nathan Kerr, Shanti Plas, and Chuck Kusher.
Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hands on the public side that has a call-in number there, so we'll stick with 22 voting members there. So thank you, Charlie. With that being, we do have a hand go up. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, what do we need to do to be able to hear from Michaela before we vote? Because she seems to have something she wants to share with us, and I'd hate to vote before we hear from her.
I'll second that motion.
That's a good question. Let me think about that. Let's see what Eric says here real quick, and maybe we can come up with an exception here.
I've got some helpful information. Just noting that the chapters are different in the IECC and the IRC. It's chapter 11 in the IRC and chapter 5 in the IECC. So it should refer to the entire IECC, not just the buildings chapter.
Okay, so are you talking about this sentence that we modified?
Yes, let's see. Sorry, it's a little small on the screen. So I think what, let's see here. I think what it needs to say is, I think, of this code, right?
The requirements of this code for new construction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will propose that as a friendly amendment.
Kevin, I can't hear you. Please.
I would accept that as my second.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I was muted. Thanks. You guys took care of it for me there. Okay.
We would want to do that change to the first sentence now too, correct?
I think that one's right because you're in the chapter. You're in chapter 5.
Agreed.
Okay.
The idea, yeah, that if you're just doing that change of occupancy, you have to look at other chapters within the code. That's where we're directing people to.
Cool. All right. So real quick, since there is some conversation that Michaela may want to speak up on this before we vote, we'll vote on there. All those in favor of listening or allowing Michaela to speak one last time here, please raise your hand. Okay, I have 19 to 20. Okay, go ahead and lower. All those opposed, please raise your hand. We'll just make it official here. Okay, all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, 0. Okay, Michaela, go ahead. You got some important information.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify a few things. I think Eric brought it up, which is, we want to be very careful about when we refer to chapters. And I think it was great the committee was narrowing in on that piece of it. Really, when we're referring to this, we want to be referring to all of the provisions of the IECC. And what needs to be really clear is I am proposing amendments for 3 separate codes. So I'm proposing amendments to the IEC, to the IRC, and to the IEC. And when you amend this section, you're probably going to need to amend that section in the 3 pieces of the amendment I'm proposing for all 3 codes, and be very careful about the language that's used based off of the structure of the code. So like chapters in the IRC, the chapter is chapter 11, which is for all of IECC. So that's correct. But in the IECC provisions, the chapter was just referring to existing buildings. So we really want to be referring to all of IECC in this section. So hopefully that clarifies the intent.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that being said, there still is a motion on the table and a second. I will allow for any more discussion because we had a little bit more feedback there. But anybody that wants to have any discussion, again, if you want to propose an additional amendment or change to Elizabeth and Mark, you can do so. If I don't see any hands, we'll be voting on what was already changed. Okay. I'm not seeing any hands. Hopefully everybody understood what Michaela was talking about there. So we will call for a vote then. All those in favor of approving this proposal with the intent to modify, and those modifications are on the screen, please raise your hand.
And Kevin, are we voting to approve the modification and the amendment, or just the modification?
Since the motion was to approve with the intent to modify, we are voting for the entire thing.
Okay.
So we're voting on the change, and we're also voting on the approval of this. Just some clarification there. So all those in favor, keep your hands up. So moving around, I'll give it a second here. Okay, I have 16. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 1. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Five. Okay. So this passes with those changes. Okay, we're about halfway through, so we will take a break. I'll put a timer up for 10 minutes. Feel free to turn your cameras off, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. All right, if you can hear my voice, let's start making our way back, turning our cameras on. All right, welcome back. Robbie, you have the floor for the rest of the proposals here. So we are on number 23. If you can give us an overview of this proposal, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, so this proposal, what it's trying to accomplish is straight efficiency, trying to improve the efficiency in the R value and U value table. So you'll see that there's fenestration U value improvement, and there's floor U factor improvement. And then in the insulation table, there's again fenestration U value improvement, skylight U value improvement, and then floor R value improvement, proposed requirements. The idea here is basically to improve the requirements where they're easily improved, and where in our climate zone, for example, the floor systems are generally in new construction at least 12 inches thick. So the minimum requirement makes a lot more sense to use an R30 batt insulation instead of an R38 batt insulation, for example, rather than an R30, because that batt fits properly in that cavity there, for example. Now, with regards to the fenestration side here, why there are two U factors there is the first U factor is the base requirement, lowering the U factor requirement for the window, in essence requiring a better quality window, a better performing window there. And then the second U factor is triggered based off of a footnote, that's footnote J in the R value table and footnote G in the U factor table, that is saying that if your window to wall ratio, or to conditioned floor area ratio is greater than 15%, you need to use the second U factor. This is trying to get parity with the performance pass, because in the performance section of the code, R405, there's a reference home built in that code, and that reference home doesn't give you credit really for it starts in essence penalizing you if you're using if you have a home that has a window to conditioned floor area that's greater than 15%. And that's not mirrored in these other pathways. So this is trying to create parity between this pathway and the performance pathways in the code to achieve greater energy efficiency. And then the last thing that this table does in the R value section, because that is the only section that deals with slab edge insulation, is to ensure that slab edge insulation, if you're building a slab on grade home, is carried around between the connection between the garage and the slab edge and any attached patio in the slab edge, that there's a thermal break associated with those locations as well. So again, this is all about increasing the efficiency requirement, and then I guess there is one last section there. There's a section that talks about what's required on your construction documents. And in order to make it easily attainable for plan review, we're asking that we add this number 10 to the construction documents requirements so that the calculation of the percentage of conditioned floor area is already done there. So I'm open for further questions.
Thanks, Robbie. We are going to turn it over to the general public first. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal for the general public, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal from the general public, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we'll go to opposition. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition of this from the general public, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that wants to speak in opposition of this from the general public, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I turn it back over to you, committee. This is your opportunity to ask questions. At this time only, we will take questions for Robbie. Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Robbie, in order to just kind of clean up this language a little bit in the table and the footnote, instead of having the two values, there can instead of saying in the footnotes that the second value shall be required, we just change the footnote to just say 0.25. I think that'll just be cleaner, easier to understand instead of having these different values within the table. The impact is the same. Is there any concern from that perspective, Robbie?
I don't think so. I think I think that makes sense. I think the rationale there was to just visually represent that there's a difference there and that they really need to address that footnote and be cognizant of that. That might not be as visually pop out to a architect or somebody else that's doing specifications for the house, but I think it achieves the same thing. So if you think that's better, I think it works.
Yeah, if we wanted to go in that direction, I might ask if you would be open to actually putting the 0.25 in the table and then editing the footnote to allow the 0.27 when the area is less than 15%. So that way, if people ignore the footnote, it's a conservative design, conservative assumption.
I think that works as well.
Thank you.
Next up is Christy.
Robbie, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the language in the table, the values 0.27 and 0.25 relative to product availability in Denver, meeting those values, especially considering the eliminated footnote F, which accommodates challenges with having argon fill at altitude in Denver. I'm a little curious about those values.
Yeah. So the 0.27 is based off of our climate zone's Energy Star qualified window. And that level of window is available in our market. The 0.25 window is available in our market. It is obviously, as you go down in U value, the price of the window does go up a bit, but these are windows that are available in our market, readily available, and in some cases available without gas fill.
Do you have a sense of what that price differential is to get to those as like our baseline here?
I don't. Bill Rectanis or another builder on the committee might have a better idea than I would.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody from the committee want to chime in on that one? Feel free to unmute. Bill, I saw your hand go up. Do you have a different question or do you have an answer to that one?
I was just gonna, I mean, I'd have to go look. I mean, it's obviously on a window by window basis, but it could add up, you know, depending on the amount of windows that you have in the house to be a significant number. And when I say significant, I mean, you know, $1,000, $1,500 a house to go to those higher U values. And you know, like I said, it really depends on the home. You know, some of the homes we build have 30 windows in them and some have 15. So it's really dependent on size and number of windows in the home, but there is a definite cost impact that will be passed along to the consumer for that increase.
Yeah. I just to add to that comment, or a different perspective, I guess, with regards to the lower U value, the 0.25, it is also linked to reducing the number of windows to, or at least incentivizing reducing the number of windows in the house so that you don't need to go as low as 0.25. The window to floor ratio is a big trigger for the overall energy performance of the house. So a way to improve the energy performance of the house in our effort to try to get to electrification and make it sense to get to electrification is to reduce the energy loss through windows, which is, you know, even at this level is an R value of 3 to 4 or so versus the R value of your wall, which is in that 20 to 25 range.
All right, next question comes from Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Robbie, given that footnote F, and particularly F1, is very pertinent to where we are, can you explain the reasoning for the deletion of footnote F?
Window U values are readily available in our market at these levels with and often sometimes without gas fill. And so that footnote is specifically trying to address gas fill. And when gas fill is included, it's also available in our market. So I think that we've addressed the issue of windows that are manufactured at a lower elevation coming to our elevation, and the potential for that gas to dissipate outside of that window between the glasses. That issue has really been addressed. And the products are available. So it seemed to make sense to not allow a poorer performing window.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions from the committee? Seeing no other questions, and we didn't have anybody from the general public speak up, we will go to the next step in the process, and that is anybody that wants to make a modification or motion or have discussion. This is your opportunity to do so. Anybody from the committee that wants to make a modification, a motion, or have discussion, please raise your hand. Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just an observation that there are a few kind of coordination and grammatical items that I think need to be taken care of within the specific language. For just one example, in the top table, the Marine 4 was crossed out, or not crossed out, in the bottom table was. So it's just a little bit of cleanup. It doesn't change the impact or intent of the application of the code. But I did just want to identify that, and there are a couple other things within the proposal. So assuming that the committee is considering approving this, we would just ask, or I would ask that we just be allowed to make some of those minor edits to just provide for clarity. That's all. Thank you.
Sure. I'll just say one example here. So footnote talking about marine and different climate zones. However, the table, we're only talking about climate zone 5 kind of thing. So that's what I think Eric is trying to talk about there. Any other discussion, or anybody want to make a motion or modification? Courtney.
Thanks. I really liked Eric's point of using the 0.25 in the U factor with a footnote that allows you to use 0.27. So I would make a motion to do that.
Okay. Give me a minute while I try to do that while we talk. Give me one.
So keeping the footnote, moving the 0.27.
Someone read that and make sure I captured that correctly.
I think maybe change the shall be required to shall be allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think we need a let's see, of not more than 0.27 shall be allowed, just for explicit that 0.27 is the maximum value on that.
Then we would have to make the same change here for this one, I would assume.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I second that for what it's worth.
Okay, cool.
You might be able to just cut and paste that other one.
That's if it's exactly the same footnote, I am okay with that. And this now is no longer J footnote then, is that correct?
Correct. However, there are other footnote numbering edits that need to be made. So that would be one of the things I was talking about.
Okay, cool. Understood. All right, Courtney, thanks for that. Eric seconded that motion. Chuck, go ahead.
One of the general edits is the SHGC is in one table, but not the other table. And I think that's a substantial edit that should be approved by committee.
Okay, are you talking about these two sections right here?
Yeah.
Highlighted?
Yeah.
Okay, just for Robbie, for a point of clarification, was that the intent there to have those different?
That is the current structure of these tables in the IECC. So I did not propose to change that, but it could be something that you want to do.
Okay, Robbie, so just for information purposes for the committee, can you explain the differences from the upper table and the lower table then?
The upper table is based off of U values or U factors, and the lower table is based off of R values. The upper table, generally speaking, is used primarily for reference, when you move to software modeling for the energy code, the lower table is generally what is used when you're using the prescriptive pathway for demonstrating compliance. The structure of the tables did not change from what is in the IECC currently. Just values within the table changed.
Looking at the 2021 IECC, both tables have 0.4 SHGC values.
Correct. Yeah, I think maybe it was an editing, perhaps a table editing error, but 0.40 is the model code language.
My copy matches this one here. It says NR on one and 0.4 on the other. Must have changed at some point.
Yeah, climate zone 5 is the only one where that's the case, though. All other climate zones, they're identical.
Yeah, must have been a typo.
Yeah, good catch.
Yeah, the currently published version on ICC's website, including the errata, does show it as 0.40 in table R40212. So my recommendation would be to match that with the 0.40.
Okay, Courtney, are you okay with that?
Yeah, definitely. It's not a change really.
Okay,
in my
good.
opinion. Yeah.
Sure, just making sure. All right, next up is Elizabeth.
Sorry, I was just going to chime in on that, but I'm all good. Thank you.
Okay, Alan, you're up next.
Yeah, for the revision to footnote G, should we, I'm looking at other parts or other footnotes where it reads where the element U factor shall not exceed. Should that language be lined up more to relate that? So maybe fenestration U factor shall not exceed 0.27 versus the way we have it written now. It seems to me like it might align more with what else is in the code.
Yep.
Like that, Alan? Did we capture that correctly?
If you look at footnote C, how it reads, basement wall U factor shall not exceed. I think you could put fenestration U factor shall not exceed 0.27.
Courtney, are you okay with that? Okay, and Eric already agreed. Okay.
And then you could just remove that second part after 0.27. Shall be, yeah.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, there is a motion on the table to amend this. And so we're going to vote just on the amendment portion, since that's the motion there. And what we changed, just for reference, is the glazing fenestration number up here, and then 2 footnotes to be exactly the same for the upper table and lower table. So we're voting on those amendments to this proposal. All those in favor of that, please raise your hand. Okay, I have 18. Go ahead and lower them. Did have one person drop out. Right. I'm going to lower your hands and fill them up. Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand. None. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. 18-0 on just that amendment. Okay, moving forward. Oh, Brian, did you have a question? No, okay. So now that we have approved those amendments, is there a motion that someone wants to make? Eric.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I'd like to move to approve as amended with the intent to further modify just grammatically to correct and coordinate footnotes and things like that within the tables, not to fundamentally change any of the other language in the code.
Understood. Is there a second? Christy.
Sorry, yes, I'll second.
Okay, great. Any discussion? Seeing none. So there's a motion to approve as amended with the intent to further modify or further clean up just the grammatical items in there. All those in favor of that, please raise your hand. Moving. Okay, I see 18. Go ahead and lower those. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Seeing none. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. 3. Okay, go ahead and lower them. So this passes 18-0. One other item of business with this is that since there needs to be a subcommittee to help further fix this, anybody want to be a part of that, please raise your hand so Charlie can write that down on for you. So Eric, anybody else? Alan, anybody else? Okay, so Eric and Alan will help fix those. Charlie, please make a note of that, and we'll move on. Robbie, you have the next item. Oh, did someone have something? Or Robbie, were you already speaking? Sorry.
That was me, I think.
Okay, so we're gonna go item 7. Go ahead.
So this proposal, like the last, is trying to incrementally increase efficiency of the installation, but in this case of the installation of ductwork, with the recognition that we need to talk about the duct system in its entirety, which includes the air handler. And in this case, we are talking about an incremental approach of beginning to bring the air handler or parts of the duct system into conditioned space where they will perform substantially better from an energy efficiency perspective than if they are located outside the building envelope. So what this does in the first section is make the connection between ducts and air handle that it's all part of the same system. And then there's a specific requirement that the air handler shall be installed within conditioned space. There is an exception, in essence, in the current language of the code that allows smaller size ductwork to be insulated to an R6 versus an R8. That exception has been removed. The majority of the ductwork that's installed for HVAC systems is greater than 3 inches, and there is R8 duct available out there if you were to be using it outside the conditioned space. There currently is a need to understand if there are ducts, if you, or how you in essence claim that a duct is located inside the conditioned space of the system there. So this next section is dealing with ducts and air handlers located in conditioned space and how you define that if they're located in conditioned space or not. And so it adds the air handler as being part of that requirement to be located in conditioned space to improve the efficiency of the system itself. The next sections of the code deal with duct installation, and that would be ducts located within ceiling insulation. There's some additional areas here to clarify that if you're going to install in this way, that the duct needs to be located down on that bottom cord of the truss, or if it's in a joist system in such a way that that the duct is actually within the insulation itself there to get better performance of that duct there, and less loss either on the heating side or the cooling side when air is moving through that system. And then lastly, the effective R value of deeply buried ducts. We don't see deeply buried ducts here very often, but when it is used, it's used primarily for the performance pathways, and you have to be able to assign an R value to that duct system that's in the attic. And that's what this section does, and it brings in the reference to the energy rating index pathway, as well as the total building performance pathway, which was there before.
Thank you, Robbie, for the summary. We will go to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. I see one. Mike, you should be allowed to talk. Mike, please introduce yourself, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, Mike Fulton, Western Mechanical Solutions. I would like to say that I would agree with this. The one question I have for Robbie would be, the commercial code actually requires R12 in our climate zone for exposed ductwork. And I'm curious why you would propose only R8. I get that it's better than what's there, but it would seem that you would have more potential in a residential application to save energy as compared to a commercial where, you know, a package rooftop would be off a considerable amount of time and not have that standby loss. So that's my question. Or suggestion, I guess, is to increase it to R12.
Yeah. So R8 flex duct is primarily what's used in these situations when a duct is located in a ventilated attic, for example. It's readily available. It's what is currently in the language of the IECC. And there wasn't a recommendation or a proposal to change it. So because it's common in the market primarily. Could it be changed? I think it could potentially be changed. I think I don't know offhand in the residential sector how available any ductwork that's higher than R8 is. In the commercial sector, it sounds like it's readily available, but the duct, I don't think a lot of flex duct is used in the commercial sector as well. So you're talking about insulation that would encapsulate a hard metal duct in that commercial side of the equation. So it's just not prevalent in the residential side. So it didn't dawn on me, I guess, to make a recommendation to increase the R value, although increasing the R value of the duct does make sense.
Okay. Any other people, anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support? All right, moving to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it back over to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions and questions only. There are, Courtney, you're probably going to ask your question here, so go ahead and ask what you want to ask.
I'm not trying to throw anything off track, but Eric and Kevin, I'm curious if we can incorporate discussing the Denver Green Code version of this proposal, so we don't have all the back and forth, and we can be efficient on that. I defer to both of you.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Eric. I don't know if there's another proposal number that I can bring up here quickly, or if it's, I don't think it's within this one.
It's in the
It
bottom.
is, it's at the bottom.
Okay, cool. There we go.
So
So would Robbie also be talking on this one too?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Robbie.
So this is Robbie again. The primary difference between the first proposal for the IECC and the second for the Denver Green Code is in that first section R401.7, which is requiring that both the duct and the air handler be installed within the conditioned space of the house. There's significant data out there that demonstrates that the overall performance of the HVAC system is improved when the entirety of the system is within conditioned space. Not only from an efficiency perspective, but from a duct leakage perspective, this is proven to be true. The rest of the proposal is really follows the IECC proposal. Gives some other options for how to install the duct. So if you were to install it in the attic, for example, you could install a closed-cell foam over the top of the duct and bring it into the conditioned space in that way. So there is some flexibility that's there to keep the duct in the attic location, but to install it in such a way that it will perform as if it's inside the conditioned space of the house.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. So what we'll do is we'll go back to the general public for any buddy that wants to speak in support of opposition of the Denver Green Code one, and then we'll come back to the committee. So that's what we'll do to kind of hear both of these at the same time. So general public, anybody that wants to speak in support of this Denver Green Code proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, committee, back to you. We will open it back up to questions on either one of these. Questions only at this time. Okay, last call for questions on either one of these proposals in the committee. Seeing none, we'll go to the next section, which, since we did have somebody speak in support on the first one, we have to allow the general public to speak in support again. As a rebuttal, anybody from the general public that wants to have a rebuttal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public with a rebuttal, please raise your hand. And third and final call, anybody from the general public with a rebuttal, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, back to the committee. Committee, this is your time to have discussion, make a motion, or make a modification, anything of that nature on either one of these proposals. Committee, this is your time to make a motion. Are you okay with this? Are you not okay with it? Do you have questions? Do you want further discussion? Do you want the hearing to end? Okay. Oh, Ken, go ahead.
I make a motion, we approve this amendment as written.
Okay, great. Is there a second? Eric?
Actually, point of order, Mr. Moderator, are we voting on only the energy code amendment, or are we voting on energy and green code simultaneously?
Sure, we would be voting on both, but I guess since Ken made the motion, Ken, can you just clarify, would your motion be to be voting on both of these, or would you like them split up?
Let's vote on both of them.
Okay, great. So there's a motion to vote to approve on both of these. Is there a second?
I'll second it. This is Paul.
Okay. And there's a second. All right. Any discussion? Nope, seeing none. I'll call a vote. All those in favor of approving both amendments as written, please raise your hand. Sorry, both proposals as written. I think I said amendment. Sorry about that. All right, so hands are still moving. Still moving. All right, I see 16. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I got one. Okay, go ahead and lower their hands. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. We'll see some movement, and we have 4. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. So this one passes 16 to 1 to 4. And we'll move to the next one.
Okay,
next
so-
item is item 46, duct testing. Go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah. This proposal is again seeking to incrementally improve the performance of the HVAC system to better meet the City of Denver goals. This proposal also has an IECC portion and a Denver Green Code portion. So we'll talk through both of it. The way that the duct testing section is written in IECC, there's a charging language that basically says that you have to test the system, and then there's a performance target that is created in the next section. What this first part is doing is saying that you have to test it, and then the proposed additional language here is trying to ensure that we have a common understanding of what the duct system is. That the duct system doesn't just include the duct, it includes the air handler, the filter box, the supply and return boots. When you're doing these tests and you're working with the HVAC contractor, you often get into an argument about what constitutes the duct system and what can be taped off and what can't be taped off to be able to pressurize the system to determine how leaky it is. So we want to be crystal clear here that the entirety of the system is being tested here, and that way we're going to get better systems overall here. The next section is gets into the targets that, or the allowable leakage that's allowed by the code. That didn't change. This just moved some things around in order to make it more clear where the exceptions apply, and that some of the exceptions apply to both if you're testing at a rough stage and or if you're testing at a final or post-construction stage, and some of the exceptions just apply to the rough stage of construction there. So that's really the issue for the IECC. If we move into the Denver Green Code, this section, what it primarily does is dealing with the actual duct leakage targets here. So in the IECC, it's a 4 CFM of leakage per 100 square feet of conditioned floor area. that's allowed. What's being proposed in the Denver Green Code is that that be lowered to 3 CFM or 3 cubic feet of air per minute per 100 square feet of floor area, so that we're getting tighter ducts, we're getting better delivery, we're getting better efficiency in the Denver Green Code by making that change there. There's some similar exceptions that are taking place in this code as well.
Okay, thank you, Robbie, for the summary. I will open up to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of either one of these, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of these proposals, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, either one of these, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I turn it back over to you, committee, for questions. Anybody that has questions on either one of these, please raise your hand. It's the second time. Anybody from the committee have any questions? Alan, go ahead.
So on the first, where it says rough and test, right at the beginning, the revision reads all portions of the duct system, including air handler, filter box, supply, return boots, shall be test. And so it sounds odd to me. I don't know if that, there has to be some revision in there.
It should be tested, yeah.
Shall be tested, I think is what you meant. And that should carry on to number 2 as well.
Thank you.
Eric, what's your question?
Thank you. The amendment in the same 2 top sections here remove the language that indicates registers shall be taped or otherwise sealed. And it seems like that language should be maintained. I apologize if I'm misunderstanding something here, but the question to Robbie is, don't we need to tape these registers to do the tests?
Yeah. So the 2021 added the testing in accordance to ANSI ResNet IECC 380 and the ASTM test as well. So you can choose your testing methodology, and within those standards, it clearly describes what the preparation that you need to do in order to do the test, which includes taping off and sealing the registers. So that's why that was removed.
Okay, as a follow-up to that though, does the standard not also clarify or provide that the test is not exclusive to the ducts, that it's for the system?
Not explicitly.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll go to the next portion. Sorry, Chuck, you got a question?
Yeah, Robbie, can you expand on the exception for the 1,200 square foot of conditioned floor area or less, and why that's needed?
Yes. So if you take, let me get a calculator here real quick. If you take 12 times 4, you get 48 CFM of allowable leakage in a unit that's 1,200 square feet. So if you have a 500 square foot unit, for example, you'd go 5 times 4, get 20 CFM of allowable leakage. It gets really hard to seal a system that is that tight. So there needs to be some allowance for smaller dwelling units when you're using a CFM per square foot, per 100 square foot metric of compliance metric there.
All right, we will open it up to any other discussions or motions then. Anybody on the committee has any further questions, comments, motions? Nobody? Eric, go ahead.
Just, right. Sorry. Robbie, in your proposal, you are taking the language that was in the body of the section that we're looking at here and created two separate exceptions, A and B. Can you explain why? Why not just leave A in the body of the language and then just create one exception B?
So in the the language that's in the existing code is an exception, but it wasn't depicted as an exception. So to be consistent with the way that the code is generally written, it appeared to make sense to break it out as a true exception.
Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Someone feel free to make a motion if you would like. Eric, go ahead.
I'll move to approve as submitted with the acknowledgement of the editorial change to tested.
Okay, and are you, is your motion for both the IECC and the DGC?
Yes. Apologies for both IECC and DGC.
Okay, great. Is there a second? Courtney.
Second.
Great. All right, any discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote. We are voting on approving this proposal, both of the IECC and the DGC, with just those editorial changes with the, instead of being test, it's tested. All those in favor, please raise your hand. You'll see some hands moving. All right, I have 16. Go ahead and lower your hand. And I'm going to lower your hands for you. Okay, all those opposed, please raise your hand. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I see 4. Okay, both of these pass 16 to 0 to 4. All right, next up, let me pull up the agenda. We have 11.2. Robbie, that is yours. Go ahead, and I'll pull that up for you.
So this proposal, the benefit of this proposal is twofold. One is to increase the efficiency of mechanical equipment that is being brought into the structure, and the second is really a health safety issue. So this proposal is saying that any atmospherically vented equipment cannot be installed in a new residential building or dwelling unit in Denver. And by doing that, we are in essence getting rid of combustion safety issues and also increasing the efficiency of the units that are being installed.
Okay, thank you. I'll move to questions from the general public, or sorry, all those in favor. Oh man, I am flipping up there. General public, anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. None. I will go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee for questions. Any committee members that have questions, now's your time to ask. Eric, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Robbie, I'm curious with respect to non-continuously burning pilot lit water heaters, just from a conventional system perspective, how available are these, and at the price point, at what price premium, I guess I would say? Definitely, I have a concern there about not being able to source them and the cost difference.
Sealed combustion water heaters are readily available. They're installed every day. And then we have the other option would be tankless gas water heater or tankless electric water heater, I guess. And then you also have your choice of heat pump water heaters. They're all readily available in the market now. Probably the most installed water heater right now is a power vented water heater that does have a standing pilot light. And the cost difference between that and a true sealed combustion water heater, tank style, is, I mean, I haven't bought one in a long time, but my guess is it's less than $500.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Chuck.
So that's okay when you talk about new construction, but when equipment is being replaced, what type of added cost would it be to go from a natural draft water heater tank style to a power vented or sealed combustion? I mean, the vent system needs to be completely replaced.
Yeah, it could be more for sure. I can't tell you exactly the cost differential, but the tanks themselves, you know, it's likely that it's a good $1,000 difference between a true atmospherically vented hot water heater and a sealed combustion water heater. The only thing I would add there is that those atmospherically vented water heaters, you do have a serious potential for combustion safety issues with, in addition to the efficiency issues.
All right, Eric, your hand's still up. I don't know if you have another question.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Robbie, I'm maybe just a little confused with the language that the model language indicates natural gas systems and equipment listed below shall not be permitted to have continuously burning pilot lights. And then the edit in item number 1 includes mechanical draft water heaters. Am I misunderstanding that? Isn't that a power vent water heater that would be allowed to have a continuously burning pilot light?
It's saying, so the R403.1.3s, the natural gas systems and equipment listed below shall not be permitted to have continuous burning pilot lights. So mechanical or natural draft furnaces, boilers, or water heaters. Those, so a mechanical draft, so a power vented water heater is not allowed to have a pilot light. So that would switch you over to a sealed combustion water heater.
Thank you for that clarification.
All right, any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I do see one. Ken, go ahead.
Sorry, real quick question for you. You mentioned earlier, we were talking about for straight replacements in existing facilities. I guess, wouldn't this potentially fall underneath the repair under chapter 5, and therefore this wouldn't necessarily be applicable to a replacement water heater? I just want to get a clarification on that.
I think it would definitely fall under chapter 5. The question is, would the section that chapter 5 addresses, would it link you back to this section of the section 4 or chapter 4, I guess, of the IECC or not? We would have to take a look at that. I'm not positive if repairs take you there or not.
Yeah, I basically would have the same concerns that others have voiced. It's just pretty impactful, not only the water heater, but replacing an atmospheric B vent with CPVZ can be pretty impactful depending on where the water heater is located.
Yeah, if you give me a second, I can look here real quick on chapter 5 under repairs.
It would apply. It says shall comply with R403. So it's the entire section. So I believe there is a reference back from chapter 5.
Okay, Ken, your question's still out there. It sounds like we've got confirmation though that it does change you back to this section on existing units.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We will move to discussions or motions at this time. Feel free to continue the discussion. Feel free someone to make a motion. Eric, go ahead.
Move to approve as submitted.
Okay. There's a motion to approve as submitted. Is there a second? Antonio.
Motion to approve as submitted.
Okay, so you second that then? All right.
Yes, sir.
Any further discussion? Just as a point of order, we did have one other person drop off, so I believe we're at 20 members at this time. So I'll call a vote. All those in favor of approving this proposal, please raise your hand. All right, we see some hands moving. Still moving. Okay, we have 11. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those not in favor, please raise your hand. One, go ahead and lower your hands. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. I see 8. Okay, so this does pass 11 to 1 to 8. Go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, next up, we have a little bit of time, so let's go ahead and get into it. Item number 45. Robbie, go ahead.
Yeah. So the primary intent of this proposal is to clean up the language, the confusing language that got into the 2021 IECC. The bulk of that confusion happens with this new section R402.4.1.2 testing that was added to the 2021 IECC. This language is intended specifically to address the building performance pathway and the energy rating index pathway and set a maximum level of air leakage that you can't trade off beyond there. However, it doesn't specifically address that, it doesn't specifically say that that's what it's for. So a lot of people interpret it that the air leakage rate of 3 air changes per hour that's been in the code since the 2012 IECC was relaxed to 5 air changes. If you scroll down to what I struck out here at R402.4.1.3 leakage rate, this is where the climate zone specific leakage rate is addressed. So in Denver, we want to keep the 3 air changes requirement. So I struck out this climate zone specific area, and I used the charging language in testing to establish that leakage rate there, so that it's understood that in Denver there's just one leakage rate. It's a requirement for all the compliance pathways there, and that way we better ensure the energy performance parity between all the different compliance pathways that are available to builders and architects in our climate zone and in our city. The next thing that it does really is because we are now referencing standards for how to do the blower door test, the infiltration test on the houses. Again, we don't need the during testing section there to address how to set up the house for the test. And then that just made the exceptions change a little bit. And so the exception for attached heated private garages was taken out, and the other test or the other section became an exception. So the way it was set up before, in essence, you add an exception to the exception. Now you just have 2 exceptions that are in the code. So a lot of this was just cleaning up the language so that it makes more sense for our specific situation here in Denver.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. Just a point of order real quick. Charlie, if we drop below 20 members, we no longer meet quorum. So keep that in mind when we're going through with this real quick. All right, so general public, anybody that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Anybody who wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public wants to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee. Chuck, before we get started, I see your hands up. I don't know if you had something you wanted to add. Okay, good. Anybody from the committee that has any questions, please raise your hand. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, so similar to the duct leakage question, can you kind of expound on why the during testing part you got rid of kind of the guidance on how you set up the building? Yeah, I know you're referencing E1827, IECC 380, ResNet, whatever you want to call it, but those standards have different guidelines in them, like how the building should be set up. It's not like they're very specific. So that language before made it more uniform kind of testing, whereas those standards now it gives you a lot more options in terms of how you prep the building and how you read those standards. So what do you think? Do you think we should get rid of all that prep language altogether and just rely on the standards, even though, we might have different routes for testing?
Yeah, I think it's a valid question. However, the reason it was struck was because it does talk about how to prep a building within the standards. So I don't believe that anybody looks at the during testing additional language there, because most of it is redundant to what's already in the standards. But it does potentially mean that there's different different language in different standards. And I, to be honest, I do blower door testing, and I rely solely on the 380 standard. So I don't know that specifically if there are differences in the ASTM standards or not, but it would seem to make more sense if you're looking to get true consistency to rely on one standard rather than adding additional language during the testing, additional language in the body of the code to get that consistency, because I don't think that most testers look at that language, and I don't think that any code jurisdiction or code official looks at that language if they were to go out and evaluate a test that's being done.
Okay, next question comes from Chuck.
Robbie, in exception number 1 for the heated attached private garages, you deleted the reference to table R402.4.1.1, which is the air barrier, air sealing, and insulation installation requirements. And I was curious what the reasoning was to delete that reference.
So that table is already a requirement, and in the old language of the IECC, it's a mandatory requirement, and that's what requirement now means in the 2021 IECC. Within that table, there is a calls out specifically the garage, and that the garage needs to be separated from the house. So it's redundant.
Okay, next question comes from Alan.
Hey, Robbie. So when you go to number 2, when testing individual dwelling units, and you have the permitted in all climate zones for, so we have a 1 and 2, and they differ slightly from what is in our current amendments. So I think attached single and multiple family perhaps indicates townhouses. In our amendments, it's clearly written as attached 1 and 2 family dwelling units and townhouses. So I don't know if there's a clarification there. I mean, often we hear multiple family on the commercial side, it takes you out of the IRC and our minds go to the IBC. So I don't know if that's quite an issue, but it's different from what's in our current amendments. And then for number 2, the square footage in our amendments is listed as 1,000 square feet or smaller. Here we're back up to 1,500. So in my mind, that's less restrictive than what we currently require. And then our amendments have a third category for RX occupancies built in accordance with the IBC section 429, City County of Denver. So I don't know if that was intended to be deleted or if that should be included back into this.
And just for my clarification, RX would be like the auxiliary dwelling unit?
Yeah, so I think we allow certain IBC occupancies to use the IRC. So like R3 care facilities or R4 assisted living?
Well, I'll talk to that last one first. So the code is looking to test at a dwelling unit level. So if you had a assisted living unit level, I think the building would be classified differently than the residential code. Or it would be, you would consider each, if it was like an apartment for an elderly person, then it would be considered a dwelling unit, and you would test it at that dwelling unit level. And these two exceptions would apply there. So I'm not sure, unless it's specifically giving an exception for like an auxiliary dwelling unit, but that also would probably fall under the size characteristic. So I'm not sure that I guess to answer the question and take in the difference in the language in 1 and 2 that's shown here. I don't think that the existing language in the amendments in Denver were known and taken into consideration here. So I do believe that 1 and 2 should be changed for sure. And I think I would leave it up to you and the city to decide if the third exception should be added back in as well.
Okay, that's it for questions. Just as a point of order, Charlie, I believe we dropped below our quorum number of 20 people, voting members. So unfortunately, we will have to table this for next time. So sorry to cut that short. I thought we maybe get that squeaked in, but unfortunately, we got to follow the rules there. We lost quorum, so we can no longer take any votes on this. So this will be tabled until next time. One more quick thing I had that last time we spoke, we had Ken, I believe you made the motion for an item for data center efficiency water requirements, and we were going to work on finalizing that MLC number. But we didn't see if anybody, we didn't get anybody to volunteer. I didn't ask anybody who wants to be a part of that subcommittee. So for purposes of that, anybody who wants to raise their hand to be part of that subcommittee, please raise your hand. So we got Ken. So Charlie, please make note of this. Ken, anybody else wants to be a part of that? Chuck is going to be a part of that. Anybody else? Okay. So that's just a housekeeping item that I forgot to ask about. So other than that, that's it for today. Robbie has his hand up, but feel free to leave. I'll leave the webinar open for any comments, but Robbie, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that Alan made a really good point that we should have probably included the Denver specific amendments to in the 2018 adoption for these exceptions. And I was wondering about bringing a modified proposal back since this wasn't voted on, and making these exceptions specific to what's currently in the Denver amendments. Is that?
Sure, I'm okay with that as long as we get those changes a week beforehand. I'm okay with that, so that the city can post it to their website and the committee can have time to review.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody again. Feel free to drop off as you will. I'll just keep calling on hands that are up though. Jeff, your hand's up.
Robbie, if you're going to change this, then I agree. For residential spaces, I think ResNet's the way to go.